Hello, today we start with a module on water, electrolyte and temperature regulation. If someone asks you what are the two essential things for your survival, the answer to that question is that the body should have the right water balance and the electrolyte balance. So, considering that these components are so vital for our mere existence, its application in exercise and sports is of utmost importance. It is very clear to all of us that the performance for any sports person or any person who is into active physical activity or workout is optimum only when the person is well hydrated, because the repercussions of poor hydration is not only on the performance, but it can have adverse consequences on the body. So, in this module, we will be learning more about water, electrolyte, regulation in relation to sports and physical activity. So, let's take the module further. Let's understand what is water in relation to our body. 60% of the body of a normal healthy individual weighing 70 kilos is made up of water. This total body water can be divided into extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid comprises 35% of the total body water, whereas the intracellular fluid comprises of 65%. It's a clear indication that because body is made up of a number of cells and each cell contains water, and the presence of intracellular water is mandatory or is a prerequisite for the survival of the cell, and that is the reason why intracellular fluid is of utmost importance, and the percentage of the total water which comes from intracellular fluid is much higher. The extracellular fluid is essentially the plasma fluid, that is the blood, which circulates across the body through blood vessels and is pumped very effectively by the heart, and the interstitial fluid which is present in smaller amounts. So, what are the functions of water? The most important function of water in relation to exercise is to maintain body temperature. Let's understand that body temperature rises by 1 degree Celsius with every 3 minutes of exercise, and for every 1 liter of sweat loss, 600 kilocalories are lost. So, the point which we are trying to make is that as we work out, as we exercise, as we play a sport, our body temperature is likely to rise, and maintaining body temperature throughout the physical activity, throughout the sports is very important, because if the body temperature is not maintained near normal, the regulatory substances which are needed for the metabolism of substrate, for the providing energy, or even the utilization of nutrients can get affected, because majority of these regulatory substances are protein based, and if the body temperature gets elevated, it can lead to denaturation of proteins. So, which means the effect of our hormones, enzymes and immune bodies, everything can get affected, and we can go into metabolic complications if the body temperature is not maintained. So, through water, through proper hydration, we can achieve maintenance of body temperature very effectively, and that is the reason why hydration pre-workout, during workout and post workout at all stages is very, very important. We will be discussing that a little later. The second thing is lubrication of joints. Now we know that the joints have the synovial fluid, which helps in the lubrication of the bones across the joint. And if this water is decreased, there is going to be discomfort in the activity and free movement. So, water is very essential for the lubrication of joints. For every 1% body water loss, there is also decrease in the plasma volume by 2.5%, muscle water decreases by 1%, rectal temperature increases by 0.4 to 0.5 degrees Celsius, and cardiac output increases. The point which we are trying to make here is that the moment we are losing water from the body, we are influencing the fluids level at all metabolic levels. The moment our plasma volume decreases, it is going to have an effect on the blood circulation to the vital parts of the body, especially the working muscle. The effect of dehydration can also be seen in the performance of the muscle and at the level of cardiac output. So, all these factors in totality can hamper or influence the performance during a workout or during a sport. Let us look at thermoregulation a little more in detail. Body temperature is a well-regulated balance between heat lost and heat gained. The normal body temperature ranges between 36.1 to 37.8 degrees Celsius. As I mentioned, during physical activity, the body temperature rises by almost 1 degree Celsius every 3 minutes. This rise in core temperature is due to the increased metabolic rate due to increased demands. The thermoregulation can be achieved by conduction, convection, radiation and evaporation. Very less of thermoregulation is achieved through conduction during sports. The major methods through which thermoregulation is achieved during sports activity is convection and evaporation. Conduction of heat takes place through the transfer of heat from a solid surface to another solid surface. During exercise, conductive heat exchange is considered negligible. Convection, the transfer of heat by the motion of a gas or a liquid which is in contact with a heated surface, that is what is convection, and that is precisely what happens within the body and outside the body when the person is into active sports. Radiation relates to body losses and its heat in the form of electromagnetic waves. Evaporation is the most important mechanism during exercise. Sweating results in water loss, which when evaporates from the skin results in heat loss. At rest, evaporation accounts for 10 to 20% of total heat loss, and this increases to 80% during physical activity. As exercise continues, core temperature reaches its threshold. At the set point, sweat production and secretion is increased dramatically. Once sweat reaches the skin, it is converted to vapor and it is lost in the air via latent heat of vaporization. And as I mentioned, evaporation of 1 liter of sweat may result in a loss of 680 wattage of heat. Now, this also brings us to a point that when we are into any kind of workout, any kind of sport, the sport gear which we wear, the sport clothes which we wear should be made of a material which are porous, which allows the sweat to evaporate from the skin so that it helps in lowering the body temperature. Let us look at the thermoregulatory control of the body. When there is an increased blood and internal temperature, what is the feedback of the body? The feedback of the body is a negative feedback, as a result of which there is increased temperature which is sensed by the hypothalamus, and this hypothalamus in turn directs metabolic changes through which there is vasodilation which occurs in skin blood vessels, so that more heat is lost from the skin. It also activates the sweat glands and thus favors increased evaporative heat loss. So, ultimately the body temperature decreases. On the other hand, if there is decreased blood or skin temperature, then how does the body respond? There is decreased blood temperature which is sensed by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then in turn through the nervous system and the hormonal secretion favors vasoconstriction, which occurs in skin blood vessels, so that less heat is lost to the environment. On the other hand, the skeletal muscles are activated, causing shivering, which increases metabolism and generates heat. So, what is the result? That the body temperature increases. So, this is how the body regulates the body temperature. The effectors of thermoregulation include the skin arterioles, that is the blood vessels which feed the skin, the sweat glands, the skeletal muscle and the exocrine glands. During sweating, essentially we lose water, but there could be electrolyte loss as well if we are sweating to a very high extent in very high intensity exercises. Elevated blood temperatures cause stimulation to the hypothalamus, which in turn stimulates the exocrine sweat glands to secrete more sweat. About 6 liters of sweat is lost from the sweat gland in a minute during high intensity activity. When we lose sweat to that extent in high intensity exercise, we are bound to lose major electrolytes, that is sodium and chloride, and which need to be replenished along with water. So, the electrolyte composition lost during sweat is variable and it depends on the intensity of the exercise. The sweat rate increases with training, along with which electrolyte content decreases. Greater sweat rate is observed in the limbs as compared to the trunk, that is the peripheral parts of the body. Sweat is hypotonic, which therefore results in hyperosmolality of plasma. Remember, when we are losing sweat, we are also losing fluid, and this has an influence on our plasma volume, which is going to have an influence on the osmolality. So, it can lead to hyperosmolality of plasma, and it may also lead to hyperthermia. Hyperthermia means increased body temperature. If excessive sweating is not supported with adequate replacement of fluids and electrolytes, it impairs performance and causes early fatigue. Let's look at the outcome of imbalance, water loss and water replenishment. The outcome of water imbalance in any situation, and especially in a situation when we are working out physically and into active sport, is dehydration. Dehydration is very crucial for cell survival, and it has a direct implication for a sports person, and the first symptom of dehydration is fatigue. The fluid loss, which is greater than 1% of body weight, is a concern and can push a person at risk to dehydration. And dehydration can also lead to electrolyte imbalance. So, what are the symptoms of dehydration? I think as a sports person or a person into active sports and active workout, we should be aware of the symptoms of dehydration. What are the early symptoms? The early symptoms are fatigue, as I mentioned earlier, lightheadedness, loss of appetite, heat intolerance, dry mouth and eyes. Whereas, if we don't detect the dehydration at an early stage, it can lead to a severe state of dehydration, wherein we can have symptoms like difficulty in swallowing because of the lack of decrease in the saliva, clumsiness, shriveled skin because the skin may lose its muscle tone, sunken eyes, painful urination, numb skin, muscle spasm and delirium. Delirium is a condition of imbalance. So, what is the effect on the exercise performance? Dehydration definitely would have an effect on the exercise performance, and it is impaired when an individual is dehydrated by 2% of the body weight. The effects include reduced alertness and inability to concentrate, accompanied with tiredness and headache. So, imagine when you are playing a sport, you need to be alert, you need to be agile, you need to concentrate on the game, on your movement, on the shot, and you need to have a very stable and peaceful state of mind. So, if such symptoms appear because of dehydration, automatically the performance of the sports person is going to go down. It is also associated with impaired cognitive performance. Capacity to work is reduced by 30% when losses exceed 5%. So, as the extent of dehydration increases, the capacity to work is bound to decrease more and more. Capacity of work in sports person is the stamina, is the ability to endure, is the ability to perform well. Now, this affects high intensity exercise and endurance training, wherein you need more stamina, you need more power, you need to sustain for a relatively longer period of time. Increased sweat loss is accompanied with reduced plasma volume. Reduction in the plasma volume has a great impact on work capacity, because essentially it is the plasma volume which determines the reach of oxygen, the reach of nutrients to the working muscle. The reduced plasma volume reduces plasma viscosity, which reduces venous return. That means the moment plasma viscosity increases, the blood's ability, the plasma's ability to return the waste products back to the lungs goes on decreasing. With increasing intensity, cardiac output also reduces. This affects the aerobic power and physical work capacity, and at maximum intensity, increased resistance and reduced cardiac filling decreases both stroke volume and cardiac output. As you remember, we mentioned about cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped out from the heart, and stroke volume is the amount of blood which is pumped out of the heart with one contraction. So, there is an influence seen both at the level of cardiac output and stroke volume with increasing dehydration or disturbed water balance. What are the other cardiovascular effects? We mentioned decreased stroke volume, increased heart rate, this is bound to happen, lower cardiac output, lower mean arterial pressure. For every 1% of body water loss, the heart rate increases by 3 to 5 beats. Thus, with dehydration, the overall working capacity, motivation to perform activity, thermoregulatory system and cardiac system all get affected. So, what are the heat related disorders? I think it is very important for us to understand that what are the disorders which can affect us if there is a water imbalance in the body. One is heat cramps, two is heat exhaustion, and third is heat stroke. Heat cramps is the least serious of the three heat disorders. It is seen in large muscles that are mostly used in exercise. The result is of sodium loss and dehydration, and the treatment involves shifting of the individual to a cooler environment and administering a saline solution orally or intravenously. Prevention of heat cramps includes proper hydration. Heat exhaustion results when the cardiorespiratory system fails to meet the need of the body and individual progresses to severe dehydration. When demands of increased blood flow to the skeletal muscle cannot be fulfilled, it leads to heat exhaustion. Now, why would this happen? Because it is very clearly mentioned that as our hydration status goes low, our plasma volume decreases. So, the total amount of blood flow is decreasing, the blood flows reach to skeletal muscle is decreasing, the cardiorespiratory system functioning gets affected. So, automatically the needs of the skeletal muscle cannot be fulfilled, and thus the heat exhaustion will occur. Sodium depletion also causes heat exhaustion, and the treatment is similar to that of heat cramps, that is moving the individual to a cool environment and hydrating with saline, that means water and electrolytes. Heat stroke is a life-threatening heat disorder. It represents complete failure of thermoregulatory fitness. It is characterized by increase in core temperature above 40 degrees Celsius. Remember, our normal body temperature is much lower, that is close to 37.4 degrees Celsius. So, there is increase in the core temperature above 40 degrees Celsius, which can be very harmful. Confusion, disorientation or unconsciousness, these can be the outcomes of heat stroke. There is altered mental status, which is very evident, and the best treatment involves immersing the individual in cold or ice water. Now, let us look at the three outcomes of water imbalance in the order of severity and at a glance. So, we see the heat illness, that is heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke in the order of increasing severity. And if we look at the warning signs and we see the heat cramps, it may start with painful large muscle cramps, profuse sweating, excessive thirst, fatigue, whereas at the level of heat stroke, it could be loss of consciousness, confusion and cessation of sweating. In addition to this, the other symptoms like nausea, headache, chills, all these things can be seen in heat exhaustion. So, what do? The answer to all these disorders is to replace fluids and electrolyte. The water intake before and during exercise should be equal to losses. Pre-exercise hyperhydration delays dehydration. So, 400 to 600 ml of cold water 10 to 20 minutes before exercising is very essential. During exercise, 150 to 250 ml of water every 15 minutes. Replenishing the lost water after a session of physical activity is also extremely important for maintaining the function of thermoregulatory, cardiovascular and muscular system. So, we need to emphasize to a sports person, to a person into active workout or physical activity, that we must condition our body towards adequate hydration both before exercise, during exercise and after exercise. If we start our workout in a hydrated state, our performance is optimal, the injuries are less and we are less prone to the disorders of water imbalance, that is heat cramps and heat stroke. The ingestion equal to 150% of weight loss resulted in optimal rehydration 6 hours after exercise. So, what to drink during training? We may start with plain cool water, which is very good and especially for mild to moderate level of exercise, because we know that with this intensity of exercise we are not losing too much of electrolyte, but we are definitely losing water. Another principle of hydration is that whatever we provide as a fluid to hydrate should be low in osmolality, because if we give a highly osmotic fluid, it is going to withdraw water from the cells and it may favor diarrhea rather than helping the cell get replenished in terms of water. Electrolytes come into the picture when we are looking at a high intensity workout, and because with the sweat we are likely to lose electrolytes as well. Now, when we make a mixture of water and electrolytes, and that is the sports drink, we see that the percentage of electrolyte is a defined percentage, maybe 5 to 10%, not more than that, or rather 5 to 8%. And as I mentioned, that the osmolality of a sports drink also would be lower than the body fluid. Invariably, we see that with electrolytes there is presence of glucose in the sports drink. The fundamental reason why we combine glucose, electrolyte and water together is because when we rehydrate a person, there is quick absorption of glucose along with water, but glucose absorption favors or drags the sodium, and sodium dragging favors the water rehydration. So, it is always good to combine sugar, that is simple sugar, with electrolytes along with water, but in a weak concentration solution. Sometimes amino acid drinks are also used as a post-workout drink. The purpose here is not only to hydrate, but to also replenish muscles with important amino acid. So, to conclude and summarize, what have we learnt in this session? We have learnt that water is a very integral part of our body. It is a part of each and every cell of the body, and it is a part of the body fluid, the blood, which is needed for our survival. The second aspect is that the presence of water in each cell and in blood has relation to a number of important functions which are carried out by the body. That means supply of nutrients, maintenance of body temperature, lubrication of joints, and very many metabolic level reactions which continue only in the presence of fluid or water at the level of cell. We also understood that how is it that the body beautifully regulates our water balance, with the help of nervous system, especially hypothalamus and the endocrine secretion. But the relevance of this water balance becomes very important when we subject ourselves to physical activity. Now, depending on the type of physical activity, the intensity of physical activity, which may come across in different kinds of sports, we have to think of the importance of hydration and hydrating ourselves. Why is it important? That also we learned, because if we do not hydrate ourselves well, we are likely to go into heat based exhaustion and finally in a severe form heat stroke. So, we need to sensitize ourselves to the important signs of dehydration, especially the early signs of dehydration, so that we don't move towards severe dehydration. Now, for a sports person, it is very important to condition herself or himself during the training of an active sport, and this conditioning should be done keeping in mind what is important prior to playing of the sport, while playing the sport and after playing the sport. So, we must continue to hydrate ourselves throughout, pre, during and post, because it is very, very clear, and we understood that the hydration status is a most important prerequisite for optimal performance. Now, another thing which was highlighted in this session was that what to hydrate with. Like I said, cold water is always preferred to hot water, and plain cold water is something which is most preferred in mild to moderate levels of exercise. It's only when the intensity of the exercise goes very high that we need to get electrolytes into the fluid replacement. But when we get electrolytes, we must have a solution which contains simple sugars, so that the absorption of sugar drags the sodium and helps in the hydration. So, I am sure you have benefited from this very, very important session.